An armed gang has attacked this house. They threaten to return for its greatest treasure. Because the owner has something the world wants, desperately. He's been described as simply the best winemaker on the planet. In the Rhone Valley in southeast France, vines are planted only where the land is angled so brazenly at the sun that the grapes will ripen fully. The most dramatic of these sun traps is the Côte Rôtie, or roasted slope.
Attention, on tire. Hey!
Marcel Guigal owns 3 tiny plots here that have become world famous. The Romans were also crazy enough to cultivate these incredibly steep slopes with vines, each one tied to several stakes for support, and no wonder. Guigal's had to invent his own way of hauling the grapes up the slope to the tractor above.
Hey!
These are Syrah grapes, the grape of the northern Rhone, whose wines are deep-coloured, dense-flavoured, often smelling of black pepper or even burnt rubber in youth, but developing over years in bottle into some of the world's most concentrated wines. Bordeaux merchants once used these grapes to add guts to their wines. In only a decade, Guigal's turbocharged single-vineyard Côte Rôties have become the most sought-after wines in the world. He prices them quite modestly, but you can only buy a bottle of his La Mouline, La Turque or La London if you're already an established customer and if you agree to buy a whole raft of his other wines at the same time. Because he only makes a few hundred cases of his top wines, prices rocket as soon as they hit the open market, so that bottles like those will become some of the most expensive wines in the world. People will offer Guigal anything for one of these wines. Someone offered him a Ferrari, and one woman even offered herself. Guigal only got into the business because his father, a humble cellar master, went blind and couldn't work. Marcel's inherited obsessive attention to detail has made him king of the Côte Rôtie, flying the length of the Rhone Valley to buy grapes. He could spend the whole time with film stars in 3-star restaurants, but he's a terrible delegator and instead spends most of his life on the phone.
C'est la meilleure et c'est la pire des choses, parce que la demande est absolument inqualifiable. Elle est peut-être 100 fois, 1000 fois supérieure à ce qu'on peut fournir.
Donc vous devez passer combien de temps en refusant vos clients?
Écoutez, c'est difficile à chiffrer, mais je pense que c'est au moins 2-3 mois par an que je passe, je ne veux pas dire que je perds, pour expliquer le plus poliment, le plus gentiment possible, mais c'est très difficile, que je ne peux pas donner satisfaction aux demandes. Parce que les gens qui envoient un chèque en blanc, par exemple, en disant je veux tant de bouteilles, ben, on ne peut pas leur retourner le chèque simplement, il faut leur expliquer qu'il y en a peu, que c'est réservé aux bons clients.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils font, les gens qui veulent acheter?
Absolument tout, hein. Ça dépasse tout ce qu'on peut imaginer. Quand on a affaire à de très jolies filles, elles sont prêtes à beaucoup de gentillesse. Les gens, certains les volent. Volent les caisses à la cave et téléphonent après en disant envoyez la facture. Certains font des cadeaux absolument gênants.
Par exemple.
J'aime bien les voitures.
Nous n'avions pas fermé nos volets à la maison et nous avons eu la visite de personnes qui ont essayé de forcer la porte, les volets. Mais nos voisins savent à peu près qui c'est. C'était des personnes qui étaient cagoulées avec des fusils. Et bon, ce qu'ils voulaient, c'était d'une part, c'était voler, mais je pense aussi, c'était plus profond encore. Ils nous voulaient beaucoup de mal, la jalousie.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont dit aux voisins?
Ce qu'ils ont dit aux voisins. Là, c'est très méchant ce qu'ils ont dit aux voisins. Ils ont dit, de toute façon, on ne peut pas. Attendez, je ne me souviens plus exactement. Si on n'a pas sa maison, un jour on aura son fils.
Ouf,
Voilà.
Ça doit vous donner beaucoup de peur. Hein?
Beaucoup de peur.
Workaholic Gigal does allow himself the luxury of a fast car, though he needed help to start it the day he took me out in it. But his greatest pleasure in life, after his wine, comes from his passion for all things Roman. He's trying to reconstruct the glories of an empire he's only read about in books. Et alors, vous avez encore des projets?
Disons que les projets se terminent. C'est un vieux rêve, hein, qui avait 3-4 ans, qui a germé, qu'on a trouvé très bizarre. Parce que bon, le style romain, j'ai eu envie d'avoir un espace de vie agréable dans le style romain, avec une véritable pierre romaine, avec des formes qui nous rappellent cette période très illustre et très sympathique.
Vous devez porter la toga. Mais
on va faire une soirée romaine, c'est prévu pour l'inauguration.
Est-ce que vous auriez jamais pensé que vous étiez tellement riche?
Non, je suis pas riche, j'ai beaucoup d'idées et j'ai la chance de pouvoir les réaliser, ce qui est quand même bien agréable.
Et voici la cathédrale.
Gigal's vast new winery is the most cunningly designed in the world. He has 2 parallel grape receiving lines, like a Boeing, he says, in case one fails. And neither of them can operate unless he's there, with son Philippe looking over his shoulder. Gigal's wines are so sought after, not just because he uses so much new oak, but because he himself pays minute attention to every aspect of production. He'll only buy grapes if they meet his strict specifications. Meanwhile, the local peasants, Gigal's old school friends, some of them, have to wait outside in the rain to see whether their grapes are good enough for his wines. Even 80-year-old André, Gigal's oldest grower, is not spared this agonizing assessment of his year's output. Gigal's computer analyzes the grapes as they're tipped into the hopper. Most crucially, they must reach 10% potential alcohol. Otherwise, the grapes will simply be diverted onto another conveyor and dumped back into the truck that brought them. It would be difficult to find another buyer at this stage. It's a borderline case. All the bewildered André knows is that at last his grapes get the green light, literally.
Est-ce qu'il est jamais arrivé que vous rejetez les raisins de vos amis?
Oui, c'est arrivé. Et ça arrive plusieurs fois par jour, hélas. Hier au soir, par exemple, j'ai refusé le lot du père de l'un de mes vignerons. Et ça, c'est très difficile quand on a un vigneron exceptionnel et puis son père est quelqu'un qui m'a vendu un vignoble. Mais j'étais obligé d'appliquer la règle et il a fallu refuser la récolte, hélas.
Ça arrive souvent, donc?
Les années tangentes, comme cette année, ça arrive, oui, bien sûr, ça arrive.
Parce que vos amis peut-être sont plus décontractés, hein?
Non, mais mes amis savent que je suis quelqu'un de relativement gentil, mais au moment de la récolte, je suis obligé d'être très très dur et j'oublie l'amitié. Je suis obligé.
Il est dur, hein.
Ouais.
Mais avant les vendanges, il ouvre, il l'enlève, mais il remet après.
Ouais.
Là, ça fait du jus, là. Ça peut être de l'ombre. Moi, c'est bon, hein. C'est bon, c'est bon, c'est bon. C'est très bon, même.
That ticket spells out André's total vineyard income for this year. Partly thanks to Guigal's success, partly because the wines themselves just taste so fashionably big and impressive, Rhone wines have become all the rage. This means that the world's wine producers can't get enough of the vine varieties grown in the Rhone Valley and its fringes. Not just the great Syrah of Côte-Rôtie and Hermitage, but also Mourvèdre, and to a lesser extent Cinsault and Grenache for red wines. For white wines, Roussanne, Marsanne, and flavour of the month Viognier from the Condrieu vineyards just round the bend there are the height of fashion worldwide, purely because of their Rhone Valley origins. Because of sudden demand for previously obscure Rhone varieties in California, Fred Klein found himself sitting on a vineyard gold mine.
These were planted mostly by the Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish immigrants, and a few German immigrants to this country. They were planted by just taking a long, about a 2-foot cutting and sticking it right into the ground and hoping for the best for the rains.
So your family would have known a time when you could hardly give these grapes away.
That's correct. We used to only get about $150 a ton for these, and that was mainly when we were shipping them to the East Coast to the home winemakers back there.
And now?
Now we're getting anywhere from $1,400 to about $1,500 a ton.
And haven't you renamed them, meanwhile?
That's correct. They used to be known as Mataro, or they're still known as Mataro in Spain, but all the people out here used to call them Mataro or Madeira, as the Italians called them, but we, of course, renamed it Mourvèdre, which is the French pronunciation.
More chic.
More chic, definitely.
More Rhony.
More Rhony, and also more expensive, so we do get more money for them that way.
California may have had the other Rhone varieties, but what it didn't have was the real thing, Syrah, which has had to be brought in from France. Someone with a particularly bad case of Syrah mania, who's planted 12,000 of these untested vines, is Doug Danilac of Jade Mountain.
I really believe that Syrah will be California's greatest red wine. Not just, good and inky or interesting, but, there's that tremendous thing about young Syrah and wines off this mountain in particular. It's sort of jet black when it's young. It's got that inky hold on color that won't let go. And, you can see the development. It might take 10 years, it might take 20 years, 30 years for this wine to finally come to a whole. But certainly that's why I think in California it's going to come together, really.
But might this just not be a fad like so many things here?
Not at all, no. On the contrary, when you look at the world's great grape varieties, I think that because there's such a popularity of Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir, which are household names, when you look at the whole list of great grapes and great wines of the world, certainly Syrah is one of those grapes. And talking with many people in the wine trade, and you ask them what the greatest wine they've ever had in their life, it's rarely Bordeaux, it's not Burgundy, but they all will mention a 61 Hermitage, which to me was very telling, that Syrah certainly belongs in that family of great grape varieties.
But while Syrah became an ultra-fashionable rarity in the rest of the world, in one country it grew like a weed. Only there they called it Shiraz and thoroughly despised it. Although Australia has the oldest Syrah vines in the world, until recently no one gave a damn.
We had so much Shiraz around the Barossa and even South Australia that you couldn't sell it for love nor money. Shiraz became very much the poor cousin of winemaking. Once it fell from grace, it was just treated very shabbily.
They were picking the grapes half ripe before they had any colour and making white wine out of it and selling it as white wine. It got so bad in the end that the government was actually forking out millions, encouraging the growers to pull their grapes out.
The vines had been brought to this valley, the Barossa in South Australia, by German-speaking settlers 150 years ago. They were hard-working Lutherans, suffering persecution in their own country. They made a deal with the British landowner who controlled the whole valley. They could buy land on the Never Never in return for working like crazy. The vine thrived here. Their original cottages are scattered all over the valley. So are their churches. And so are their graves. The great-grandchildren of these pioneers still live in the Barossa today, even though their forebears were interned as enemy aliens in the First World War. Cautious, conservative, they've created a little bit of Germany in the heart of Australia. But in the 1970s, wine became big business. The German winemaking families were swallowed up by vast corporations who set up their headquarters in the Barossa Valley with little respect for its name or its specially chocolatey Shiraz.
This was a very sad era for Barossa. Once the corporate head offices came here and set up in the main road of Barossa, that was sometimes the only time that you could actually see Barossa on a label. They took the beautiful Shiraz and just left it. They didn't care whether fruit came from McLaren Vale, Coonawarra. They used Riverland. They'd use our Shiraz fruit to bolster up Riverland wines. It was not a good time at all. It was really just accountants taking control and working out the cost of a litre of wine.
In the late 70s, things came to a head. After several big crops, the accountants were left with a glut of grapes. The multinationals decided simply to tear up their contracts with the hundreds of Barossa smallholders whose lives depended on selling grapes.
Hey, Harry, you say you want a bit of meaty?
At that time, Peter Lehman was in charge of the American-owned Saltram winery.
Lehman hasn't his Weybridge, so I better use the Califfle, the Messer. Now, thanks, Peter. What about you, Harry?
But Lehman's also a Lutheran pastor's son who had grown up in the heart of the Barossa Deutsch community with all its grape growers. So in the late 70s, you were chief winemaker for one of these big wineries here, owned by a multinational corporation.
That's right.
And then what happened?
Well, they went badly. In other words, they ran short of the necessary, i.e. money, and I just received a letter from them saying, for the 1979 vintage, you will not buy any grapes. Well, God, this left me in a hell of a spot, because when I joined the company, we were only crushing about 500, or buying about 500 tonnes, and at this stage, I'd been there 16 years then, we'd got that up to 6,000. And with people like this growers, just on a handshake, you look after us and we'll look after you. Well, then suddenly to be told that I'm not going to buy any grapes, so I rattled up my relations and friends, scraped up $180,000, which is a lot of money, but we then went and bought $2 million worth of grapes. So I resigned and went out in the wilderness, found another two partners, and we built this winery, which we have now, and it's been very, very successful.
So what would have happened if Peter hadn't bought those grapes in '79?
What if I know? I think we'd all be on the dole.
It had to be.
Yeah.
Had to be on the dole.
I'm just telling Ron here that I remember that time there were thousands of tons in the Barossa Valley. We couldn't sell it. Peter said, bring it up here. And we were out there, it was getting dark, and we never got unloaded, and all of a sudden Linky's bagger cart come up, 2 big baskets full of pies and pasties. Peter looked after his growers and says, no, get away from him.
We crushed 1,000 tonnes that day, and one of my mates said, Christ, 1,000 tonnes, how'd you do that? I said, badly. We got it through.
Lehman, bless his soul, actually came out and took the fruit, and mind you, it took him a year or two to pay for it, but at least they got their grapes sold. And most importantly, what he did then was he actually made wines from fruit grown in this area, and therefore he became the pilot light during that period when the major players didn't give a tuppenny halfpenny about this district and its region and the quality of the grapes that come out of here. What Lehman did was he was the one little flame that kept it alive. And he was good. He was really a great part. The Bishop of Barossa, we call him.
A little bit of scunge here, but we'll get that sorted out.
What? Scunge?
Scunge.
What's scunge?
Rubbish.
God, how long have you lived here?
About 5 years, but other things
How did you
to do.
accumulate all this in just 5 years?
I had to do all the landscaping and everything else, so I'm just starting on here now. I'm glad you laughed. It is a funny time. By gee, there's some treasures in there.
And how do you find them all?
Biblical system, my dear.
What's that?
Seek and ye shall find.
Now, tell me, what is so special about Barossa Shiraz?
Well, Shiraz, I think, is one of the great grapes of the world, and it does particularly well in Australia, and we think particularly well in the Barossa. And, there was a period when most people lost faith in not only Barossa Shiraz, Barossa in general, but I have always had this, and I had the history to draw back on from the great wines made at Saltram before I went there, and I could see what Shiraz did. So, it was like reading the Bible. It shall be so. It was true. The Shiraz is a great grape, and I reckon it'll outlive a Cabernet. Now, it might be a toss-up with a few years, but Shiraz, I'm just sold on it. It's a great grape.
Today, now that Australians realise just how good their Shiraz can be, and how the fancy French import, Cabernet Sauvignon's not necessarily one jot better, wines like these are treasured, highly priced, even fought over. Australia's most sought-after wine is Penfolds Grange Hermitage. Once dismissed as a dry port tasting of crushed ants, it's now recognised as essence of Shiraz, pampered and matured in American oak to produce a wine that's nothing like any French wine made in the Rhone Valley, but's none the worse for that. Outside Australia, it's sold as Penfolds Grange because the French object to this appropriation of the Rhone's most famous place name. Penfolds is the flagship company in a group called Southcorp, which controls an amazing 1/3 of all Australian wine made today. This is the portfolio that one of their reps would use to sell to a wine shop like this. See any familiar names? All of them are owned, ultimately, by the same water heater company. But at least it's an Australian water heater company. Penfolds' great rivals, Orlando, of Jacob's Creek fame, is actually owned by the French, by Pernod Ricard. One real distinguishing mark of Australian wine labels are these. Medals won at Australia's all-important wine shows, held every year in the state capitals. The Royal Hobart Wine Show, where cliques of eminent judges award gold, silver, bronze medals, or nothing at all. 153 tooth-staining wines before lunch, scores of ports afterwards. Some wine judges even get their teeth enamelled beforehand. And this is the newest judge, not absolutely sure of the rules.
Is it 17 as a bronze?
No, the bronze medal is from 15.5 points to 16.9.
Uh-huh. Oh, I see. Oh, maybe I've been too generous.
Now, the wine's okay.
Judge is a bit tough.
Good show one.
Good
I will
show
be
one.
seduced. 18.5.
18.5.
18.
10. Sorry, do that again.
Number 10.
I was going to say, you normally move your points up, Jancis, not down. Okay, number 10, 18.5.
18.5.
18.5.
18.
16.
55.5 gold. Lovely, elegant wine.
See, I'm worried about that sort of carbonic maceration
A
bit.
very raspberry freshness about it.
I think maybe just too flattering, but am I being a sort of British masochist? Oh, it's too nice. Can't be good for you, you know? It's too much fun to drink.
So we're going to go through them now.
This is our gold medal shortlist, but apparently we don't get the final say.
And then what happens then, we put them up before the chairman, and he makes the final decision. Okay, and verifies what we've done, or argues.
That's Max Lake.
Max Lake, and because he's the chairman, we agree. Okay? We may not agree, but we have very little choice.
You are seen to agree.
Well, indeed, so that's what we're going to do now.
Okay.
So they have to agree.
That's number 10. That's the wine that you felt was a little too nice.
Well, it's very delicious.
But not for me.
It's got nice tannin, nice weight. Okay, so we're all happy with that? Yep.
Up to a point.
Number 14. It's got a silver at the moment.
My favourite.
When the JANCIS is marking, it's a gold.
Yes, we got the message.
We just said there's no horse trading.
So it's a silver.
But we haven't lost yet.
Good
We've
silver.
still got the chairman to come and
That's
overrule.
true. That's true.
This is it.
Thank you.
Okay, now, 20. These good.
10 was 93, wasn't it?
Yeah. 10 and 14 were 93. The fate of some small winemaker hangs in the balance at this moment.
It does. It's actually quite awesome stuff.
Yeah.
That's very good.